Big news first is the unprecedented, abusive impeachment of President Trump by the Pelosi-Schiff coup cabal. And I hate to use the word impeachment because it suggests some constitutionality to the activity that took place, some legitimacy to the activity that took place. This was about as illegitimate an act of Congress as has ever been committed in the history of our nation. You had the House of Representatives impeach the president for doing his job, for trying to figure out whether U.S. aid should flow to Ukraine because of the corruption issues there, and for daring to assert his authority under the Constitution and as a United States citizen to object to overbroad and unconstitutional inquiries into the operations of his White House and his staff by Congress. So according to this impeachment effort, if you ask questions about Joe Biden, you'll get impeached. According to this coup, if you object to Adam Schiff asking for executive privilege materials and you object, as other presidents have done, you'll get impeached. So this is a completely lawless power grab, and it's an attack that is based on a pretext. So there's really no basis for impeachment. They made it up as they went along, and I'm going to take a step back because you have to put this in the context of the long-standing attack on our nation's institutions and abuses of power by the Obama gang, its allies in Congress, through the Obama administration and well into the presidency of President Trump, which is culminating in this unlawful coup attack on the president. In 2010, the Supreme Court ruled against the McCain-Feingold bill and allowing citizens groups to more fully participate in our nation's public policy debates and election campaigns. Now, the left, which hates the First Amendment, wanted to restrict the ability of Americans to oppose deep state politicians and leftist politicians or establishment and incumbent politicians. So they were outraged. And so contemporaneous with that, you had the rise around that time of the Tea Party. And so what the Obama gang did with their allies in Congress and their leftist allies in the nonprofit community, they began pressuring the IRS to suppress the Tea Party movement and the new groups given new life by the Supreme Court decision. So they tried to get around the Supreme Court decision by having the IRS regulate the heck out of these citizens groups, namely the Tea Party and Republican-oriented groups. They targeted their donors. They sent out harassing questionnaires as these Tea Party groups were trying to follow the law, actually went beyond the standards required under law and started filing applications with the IRS, and the IRS stalled those applications because they didn't want them to operate against the president, who was then seeking re-election. And on top of that, it was Judicial Watch that uncovered that the FBI, run by Robert Mueller, and the Justice Department were collaborating with Lois Lerner's IRS to think of ways to prosecute the leadership of these very same groups. They wanted to put them in jail. And this was going up until it was discovered in 2013 that this was happening. And in fact, the FBI had gotten the IRS records on I think it was over 1 million pages or 1 million files, it doesn't really matter, was all lawlessly obtained on these citizens groups. And they had to return them after it was exposed by Judicial Watch and Jim Jordan over in Congress. So everyone wondered what happened to the Tea Party in 2012, those of you who remember, because it was this powerful movement in 2010 that helped Republicans take control of Congress, and it disappeared during the 2012 election. Well, it disappeared because the IRS suppressed it under Barack Obama, in league with the FBI and the Justice Department and a host of other federal agencies. So that's how you had an election stolen in plain sight. And so come around to 2016, there were additional challenges. You had Barack Obama, the first president in 100 years to involve himself as directly as he did in the presidential campaign. You had Hillary Clinton, a compromised candidate who, thanks to Judicial Watch, her email scandal was exposed. Our lawsuit exposed it. Our lawsuits and FOIAs exposed it. It led to pretend criminal investigations, but publicly they were seen as criminal investigations. It led to the exposure, at Judicial Watch's lawsuits also, led to the exposure of the play-to-play operation she was running out of the State Department. And contemporaneous with that, you had Donald Trump emerging as the likely candidate for the presidency, and certainly he had it sewed up early in 2016. So what to do? Well, A, you got to protect Hillary. B, you have to target President Trump, or then candidate Trump. And so the Obama administration embarked on an unprecedented spying operation, an intelligence gathering operation, and smear operation against the presidential candidate of the party seeking to replace President Obama. You had the spying begin as soon as April 2016, probably earlier than that. According to the IG report, it officially happened, I think it was the end of July. And they sent people to spy on the Trump team. They were recording their conversations. And as the IG noted, and as the Washington Times noted today, yes, they did have spies in the Trump campaign. And then they wanted to escalate it. They weren't getting enough dirt, evidently. So they came up with this FISA fraud scheme, which was used to bamboozle the courts, who were asleep at the switch, and I'll talk about that later. And then you had it transformed into the Mueller operation. That once President Trump was elected, they were completely outraged. They began undermining him, obviously, even after he was elected, but before he took the office. And then after he took office, they continued the smearing and the harassment of the president through the Mueller operation. And that continued to the end of this year, or the early part of this year. And they weren't getting traction in using the Mueller report because the president was innocent. So they've concocted this Ukraine smear by working with deep state allies in the White House, the State Department, and the CIA, with Democrats in Congress, namely Adam Schiff, to concoct this Ukraine smear against President Trump. So it began, this approach, this massive abuse of power, where you had politicians and elected and appointed officials misuse the powers entrusted to them by the American people to target politicians they don't like and try to destroy them. It's sedition, it's conspiracy, it's obstruction of justice, it's perjury. The list of crimes goes on that were committed against us, the American people, against President Trump, against Carter Page, and yeah, dare I say it, even some of those guys who were convicted or in the case of General Flynn, admitted to lying. That's how this all began. And it's now metastasized into the worst abuse of power by the House of Representatives in American history. The worst abuse of power. No crime. And on top of that, after this impeachment charade was endorsed by the House, no Republicans voted for it, so completely partisan. And just because it's partisan, by the way, it doesn't mean in theory it's wrong. I don't buy into that. It's certainly a corrupt president potentially could convince all of his party to support him even though he's corrupt. But in this case, the partisanship highlights the lack of foundation for the impeachment. They couldn't convince one Republican, many of whom would be more than happy to see President Trump leave office. But there were no facts, no crime. I call it the great defamation of the President of the United States. This gossip girl impeachment that's based on nothing. I mean, I could go on and on about how outrageous it is, but it's an attack and affront to the Constitution. It's an attack on the presidency, and it's an attack on your right to select your own leaders. It's called self-government. And the left and the political class that runs this city, the Democratic Party, specifically in this case, is seeking to steal your right to govern yourselves. And forget about the power grab. It's petty as well, because what they're also trying to do is protect themselves from having to go to jail. Not to put too fine a point on it. What do I mean? We're impeaching you because you're asking questions about Joe Biden. So we're not allowed to ask questions about Joe Biden. We're impeaching you despite evidence confirmed and reconfirmed by the IG that for 3 years the President of the United States was being victimized by all the agencies of the federal government, who let it be known and let it lay out there that he was colluding with the Russians and there was a legitimate basis for an investigation, when in point in fact they knew since before he came into office that there was no such evidence. They were lying about it, and they were trying to figure out ways to use those lies to put this man in jail. And he starts asking questions about this very issue as it ties to Ukraine, and he gets impeached. And to confirm that this coup attack is broader than just about going after the president, you have Nancy Pelosi in ways that I don't think any normal American or scholar of the Constitution or educated layman, whatever you want to call it, would ever guess, has decided to try to withhold the articles of impeachment to leverage, quid pro quo anyone, a show trial in the United States Senate. They've abused this president 6 ways to Sunday, rolled over his civil rights. They've got his phone records illicitly. They were violating his attorney-client privilege. They gave him no rights of due process in the House. And now they want to do the same thing in the Senate. So the coup attack is not only on overturning the presidency, but overturning the Senate. So Merry Christmas, America. Your republic is under attack. What are you going to do about it? You need to call your senators and demand action. One of the things I broached this week, in an effort, I thought if it was raised soon or before the impeachment vote, it might have been able to stop the impeachment, but they didn't want to talk about it. The senators didn't. Was having a preliminary trial, a preliminary hearing, a mini trial, so to speak, on the prosecutorial misconduct I've laid out by Adam Schiff and others about his collusion with the CIA leaker, or leakers, depending on how far it goes, his illicitly getting those phone records, and the other abuses of due process on the president. So you have this preliminary trial, this preliminary hearing, this mini trial that has as its center Adam Schiff. Now you don't need a full Senate impeachment trial to figure this out. The Senate can designate a committee, the Judiciary Committee or a special committee, to hear witnesses and advise the full Senate what it found. It's not a trial in the criminal sense of the word, although it has elements of it. But it often happens in litigation that courts look at these initial issues before they allow litigants or prosecutors, in this case, to get a full trial. Prosecutorial misconduct sometimes gets cases thrown out. Failure to state a claim sometimes gets cases thrown out civilly. So what Pelosi is doing now is trying to abuse her authority to guarantee a certain trial that, as I say, denies the president due process rights. those of us concerned about the Constitution and the rule of law should be thinking of ways that allows the Senate to consider this impeachment that doesn't continue to abuse the President of the United States. I've never thought a trial is appropriate as a response to this coup. The Senate shouldn't be hijacked by the House. I've been saying that almost since the get-go. And to kind of prove my point, Nancy Pelosi says, I want to hijack the Senate. And the pushback should be, you know what? You are going to be on trial in the Senate, Nancy Pelosi. Your minion, Adam Schiff, violated all these rules, issued a subpoena that may very well be illegal for phone records, violated the president's attorney-client privilege, and may have improperly, through his staff, gained access to classified information. And then he lied about it. And we're going to let that team come in and upend the rule of law and sow discord further in our constitutional republic by harassing the President of the United States with a Lord knows how long trial? I wouldn't buy into that. So by having this preliminary hearing, I think you can have your cake and eat it too. You can get the Trump vindication for President Trump by exposing this corruption while protecting him from the harassment of an abusive smear trial, which is what Nancy Pelosi and her enablers in the Senate are now trying to corner Mitch McConnell into giving. So you need to call your senators and get them and talk to them about the very issues I'm talking about. I don't know what you think about what I'm saying. You may think quite legitimately that they should have no witnesses. It should be done in a cursory fashion, just arguments one way or another, and that's the end of it. And that's a reasonable point of view. I don't necessarily buy into it. I think if they want this abuse of impeachment to stop, there has to be a penalty for the abusers, the great defamers, the great destroyers, because they will continue abusive impeachments. They will continue to harass the president for profound power grab reasons in a way that undermines our constitutional republic, and petty criminal reasons to keep them and their allies out of jail. This impeachment is an obstruction of justice, in my view. Justice for the president, and they're trying obviously to obstruct justice for those allies who have been caught up in the illegal Spygate smears. So that's my initial take on the current constitutional crisis we're in. And of course, the Senate and the House have run home for 2 or 3 weeks. How long do you get to stay on vacation for Christmas? Do you get 2 weeks for Christmas? You get 3 weeks for Christmas? Congress does. That's another outrage. So along those lines, I know you're all frustrated that why isn't anyone doing anything about this, right? Well, you know what? This is why I love Judicial Watch, because I share your frustration. I'm a citizen too. My colleagues and I are all citizens here. Our lawyers, our investigators, our fundraisers, our media folks. I often forget our administrative staff. The wheels would come off without our administrative staff. And of course, all of our supporters. We're all citizens. We're all upset about this abuse of the rule of law. And what is it we can do about it? And that's why I love Judicial Watch, because we can do something about it. Does it solve the problems? No. But it gives us information. It gets accountability that would never take place but for Judicial Watch's litigation.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.